Hey, we're live. I always forget. I like just stare at it and then it's like, oh, we're live. Hey, everyone. Welcome on this amazing Wednesday. You are here for the Ask the Experts live stream from the International OCD Foundation. We're here every Wednesday, and on Wednesday from 9 a.m. our time, because Max is on the West Coast, Max. I love that because every time I'm talking to people, they are always on the East Coast. And so it's like the day, they've had lunch, they're good. And I'm like, it's for us, we just woke up, we ran our quick morning errands, we're like jumping on. So it's good to have
coffee.
who can I haven't had my light is a little wrong orange hue. It's like I haven't had my green tea matcha yet. Yeah, it's like everybody else is like, brisk. The the international folks, it's like in afternoon, midday. It's always different. But I feel for our Hawaii folks. I mean, if I've had some people say they watch from Hawaii, and I'm like, man, it's like 6 a.m. So, well, welcome everyone. My name is Chris Trondsen. I'm a licensed therapist here in Orange County, California. I'm one of the hosts for Ask the Experts, where we want to really just provide you with information, education, and community. We can't, unfortunately, provide you with services if you're in some kind of crisis. So please, if you're watching this and you're in a crisis, we are not a crisis hotline. We really encourage you to either dial 911, go to your local emergency room. There's also 988 and 988lifeline.org. So please head over to that if you are having a crisis. But we are here to provide you with education and resources, community. And Ask the Experts is really a live stream that's broadcasting on different platforms. It's where you can ask any question you'd like, any comment, interact with each other in the chat, and just sort of, get some direction. So we're here every Wednesday, like I said, 9 West Coast, 12 Eastern. And I'm so excited about my guest today. So before I introduce my guest, you guys are kind of like the second guest. So like I said, in the comments, we have pre-submitted questions, we have live questions. Max and I are going to chat a little bit just about everything OCD, and then we're going to jump into those questions probably in about 10-15 minutes. So make sure you get those questions in, and I'll ask it in the order that I receive them. Well, Max, I'm so excited to have you. I was, thinking about, I'm like, dude, Max always gives people great advice. He, has such a cool treatment center. He's always, helped consulting with different clinicians. So you're here in the West Coast. So I'm so excited to have you on. So Max, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell people a little bit just about your journey in OCD treatment, who you are, and what you do.
Cool. Thanks so much, Chris. Always a pleasure to hang out with you. Spend some time drinking our matcha teas and
yes,
out on OCD.
I know. I'm a matcha. It's funny because I'm a matcha drinker first, and then the green tea second, and then everybody I know in my life is a coffee drinker. But maybe it's because I have OCD, man. But when I drink coffee, it doesn't give me OCD, but it just like brings me back to the sensations, and I'm like, no, this stuff is too powerful. So I like the smooth ride of the green tea matcha.
Yeah, I have a hierarchy. Start with coffee, move to matcha, go down to green tea, maybe some chamomile, wrap things out at the end. So moving down that fear ladder, the coffee.
Yes. The people in the UK got me when I was out there for a BDD conference. Everybody was drinking tea, and I'm like, yes, okay, my people. So if I move there, I'll be the normal one. Yeah. We're more coffee people out here. Everybody wants their coffee. So
it's so true. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Chris. So my name is Max Mazel. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I run a group practice in Redondo Beach. For those not familiar with California, that's like all the way in the very south end of Los Angeles, and we're beachfront anxiety specialists. And in my practice, I primarily work with folks with OCD and OCD-related afflictions. So I do a lot of work with people with tics and Tourette syndrome and BFRBs, body-focused repetitive behaviors. I see people of all ages. I work with kids, teens, adults. I sort of love doing this work. Been doing it for over a decade. Like you mentioned, I love advocacy work, consultations, trainings, workshops, getting out here and just sharing some space with the community. I'll say a couple maybe more unique things about my practice. And you will have to excuse me. I have two little kitty cats walking around. So if you see like a furry tail coming in the screen, that is why. I'm a total ACT nerd. And for those of you that don't know that acronym, one of the a million different therapy acronyms out there, ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy. So essentially I eat, sleep, breathe, bleed, acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's a really cool, helpful way to like integrate into exposure therapy. And a lot of clients respond really well to like a combination of ACT and ERP. I'm the president of the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, the Southern California chapter, which is the professional organization that kind of oversees and disseminates all the ACT work. And I did my dissertation on ACT. So essentially I can nerd out and talk people's ears off, anything related to ACT. And then the other thing is I tend to do a lot of work with Tourettic OCD. And the reason for that, I think with my background of both tics and Tourette's and OCD, people often like seek me out if for clinically, if they want help with Tourettic OCD, or clinicians want some guidance on it. And that's always probably one of my favorite presentations to work with.
If people aren't familiar with Tourettic OCD, could you give just a little example of what that is?
Yeah, totally. And I'm happy to get into more detail too, depending on how the conversation goes. But essentially, there's like tics and Tourette's syndrome, right? Which is a tic is like a sudden, almost like aggressive, either motor movement or vocalization that happens sort of like totally beyond somebody's control. It's like a movement or a word or sound sort of slips out. And usually it's preceded by what we call premonitory urge, which is like a really acute physiological sensation of discomfort that then leads to the tic behavior. And what happens with Tourettic OCD, it's essentially like a pretty nasty combination and interaction of like traditional OCD and tics and Tourette's. And it could happen. There's so many different like ways, shapes, forms it could take place. Like a tic might happen, which could trigger an OCD compulsion, which could trigger another tic, or it might be vice versa. So there's a lot of different ways that it can look like. But usually the treatment's a little bit different because not only are we doing exposure therapy, but it's really important to be able to integrate aspects of like behavioral tic treatment. For example, habit reversal training and ACT also can be really helpful for Tourettic OCD presentations.
Yeah, one of the questions we get a lot, and we were sharing a video that Jonathan Grayson did on this very topic, and Matt Bannister, who's a IOC grassroots advocate, has a support group for it, but like visual Tourettic OCD, where people find themselves sort of staring at inappropriate parts of people's body, and then it's like they can't look away or they get embarrassed and things like that. So because you're working with Tourettic OCD, do you come across sometimes people with visual Tourettic OCD? Because I hear a lot of shame in that community and embarrassment. Just, I experienced it, and I know for me, it was very embarrassing. I'd be on like, I remember in undergrad, I'd be on you had to park far and take the shuttle, and I just find myself staring, and then you're embarrassed. And so it does feel a little different than the other presentations that I have of OCD, because it was almost like an urge that I couldn't fight, and I couldn't explain it to people until finally I saw Jonathan Grayson's video all these years later. I'm like, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what I've been struggling with for.
I'm like, where were you, Grayson? Where were you?
Yeah, I know. And to me, that speaks to the importance of advocacy and of having these conversations. Because, so many times, not only talking to clients, but even like talking to colleagues or other therapists in the community, and we're talking about different forms of OCD or BFRBs or Tourettic OCD, and the big, oh crap, I think like that's something that I have too, and like how empowering it could be to put a name to it, and then to not only put a name to it, but recognize that there's some like really cool things we could do to get some relief from it. But to answer your question, Chris, yes, for sure, visual Tourettic OCD is like definitely one that pops up that can be particularly painful with like that shame element, and that can get like very sticky. All sorts of other sort of really complex, nuanced combinations of tics, Tourette's, and OCD, where you have that, like you said, that like involuntary sort of like the really strong urge that leads you to do something, and then OCD latching right on top of that can be pretty vicious.
Yeah. I want to talk about ACT in a second, but I just want to shout out some people that are here with us. Betsy, it's always good to see you from Philadelphia. We have Nathan from Athens, Georgia. Hi from Tampa, from Wiley. So we got people all over. We got Cape Town. Gail, wow, that's so far. I've always wanted to kind of go. I always see movies and stuff people are doing there. Amy's here. It's good to see you. We have Japan in the house, which is always cool. We have Ireland. We got people all over. Just trying to get a few questions. Make sure to put your questions in the chat. Max, what I want to do is talk about ACT for a second. It's funny because when I learned acceptance and commitment therapy, I was like, wow, my therapist was doing some of that. And then when I ran into her all those years later at a conference and I was talking to her about it, she was into it. And she's like, I never really told you what it was, because at the time it was very ERP only, right? But when I discovered ACT more as a clinician, but then obviously for myself, it was just such a beautiful way, I think, to help conceptualize OCD. It was a beautiful way, like, to diffuse myself from it. There was a lot of things that really helped, and it made ERP feel less mechanical. So tell me a little bit for the folks watching who maybe only know ERP, or maybe they don't even know treatment yet. Tell us a little bit about like the core components of ACT, and for you, why you feel like it works so well with people with OCD.
Yeah, totally. I love that question. So ACT, I resonate 100% with what you're saying. It's such not only a beautiful way to do therapy, and it's so intuitive and present moment focused, but it's really like a cool way to live your life. And any ACT manual you read as a therapist or an ACT book, it's going to always say like, if you're an ACT practitioner, you need to practice what you preach. It's like, not only are we imparting these principles and tools with our clients, but we need to embody them ourselves. Otherwise, it's going to be inauthentic and it's not going to work. So the core sort of like model of ACT, the core component of it is actually like pretty radically different than like all other sorts of kind of like therapeutic approaches or theories. And in ACT, we actually don't see, you can think about them symptoms, thoughts, feelings, memory, sensations. We don't see them as inherently a bad thing. For example, we don't see people as broken. We don't want like to view feelings as good or bad. We like to view feelings as like, how workable is this for me living a rich, meaningful, valuable life? And in ACT, the problem isn't the uncomfortable feelings that we have, or maybe the scary thoughts or the negative thoughts. The problem is our relationship to those thoughts and feelings. And if our relationship to our inner experience, right, thoughts, feelings, sensation, memories, is one of fight and resistance, right? If I'm choosing what to do in this moment to try to get rid of uncomfortable feeling, or if I'm like overly attached to thoughts, right? If I have a thought that's like, oh, I'm never going to get better, such a piece of crap, what's wrong with me? And if that narrative then becomes me, if I'm too attached to that, it's going to lead me again to like engage in behaviors to choose what I do in a very restricted way. So ACT is all about, if we can sort of like step back and look at all the different, the sort of like landscape of our inner experience, our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, our emotions, without attempting to fight, to control, to resist, but also without getting like sucked into all these like sticky narratives in our mind. And if we can make space for that while connecting to our core values, like what's important to me as a friend, as a partner, as a family member, in my employment, how can I feel really good about living my life in this moment? Then you can choose your values to guide what you do based off of like the storm of thoughts and feelings. So it's a really empowering approach. It's very much of like, we're not trying to get rid of symptoms. We're trying to increase our sense of vitality and authenticity by letting go. I know it sounds sort of trite, like letting go of the things that we can't control, right? One of the core components, and focusing on what we can control, which is like, what do I want to do in this moment with my hands, my feet, my mouth? What sort of waves do I want to make in this life? And if I'm not engaged in this inner battle, all of a sudden have a lot more freedom and flexibility to do the things I could feel really good about.
You know, one thing I think you just said that has been one of the most helpful things for me, for clients and stuff, is I think a lot of times if we don't even kind of like meet the person where they're at, have a discussion about what they're struggling with, as clinicians, it can feel very dismissive. So everyone watching, I think a lot of times, I don't know if people can relate and they could put in the chat, but it's like, you know, sure, there's going to be, I always tell people, sure, we have magical thinking, right? That doesn't really make sense. My magical thinking, or I'll use somebody else's, like, you know, I worked with someone who was like, if they, you know, had a bad thought, they were going to cause a natural disaster, right? There's not really a correlation, but some of these fears, right, can feel very real. And that is something, you know, maybe somebody is sitting there and they're really like ruminating on something, and they're fixated on something. And I think what you just said is so helpful to really address, is like, there may be some things you can control, and there's a lot of things we can't control. And what I find with OCD is so attracted to focusing on what you can't control. And sometimes the things that people can control, they don't even do, because they're so fixated on the things they can't control. And so sometimes I tell people that's really what the exposure is we're going to practice working on things you can do. And all those things you keep telling me, these what if scenarios, or these things that are out of your hands, that's what we're going to learn to let go. And it's powerful for people, because they're like, okay, there are some things I can do and I can let it go. Versus sometimes I think if we're too harsh and we're like, you just have to accept it, you can't do anything and move on, people are like, but other people in my family or other people around me are doing that thing. So I think that that's such an important thing, is there may be some things, right? Like people with health related anxiety, you can go and do a checkup, or, you know, if you've been having a migraine for the last 6 days and it's not going away, you can go. But when your brain starts telling you you have a tumor and you're going to die of cancer in a week, I mean, going online and searching up tumors when you haven't even made an appointment yet, that's not in your wheelhouse. Let that go. So finding that, hey, there is something you can do, but some things you have to let go.
Yep, 100%. And yeah, I mean, ACT, it's all, I mean, one of the most important pieces of ACT is all about our values, right? Like what's important to me in this moment. And sometimes that's like effectiveness. Like, how do I want to act effectively in this moment? Is researching 12 hours a day the symptoms of like brain tumors and like not being able to think about anything else until your appointment with a neurologist in a month, probably not gonna be very effective for a lot of people. You can still make that appointment, but in that time in between, like how helpful is it gonna be to ruminate and to research and to analyze? It's going to be helpful maybe in the moment to like get rid of this like looming sense of uncertainty. At the same time, there's going to be some pretty deep costs in terms of the things that are important to that person in their life. So ACT is like recognizing not only the effects of the compulsions, right? And like kind of the taxes of avoiding things, but also like how sweet life can be if we re-engage in things that matter to us. So it's not just sort of like, oh, it's all doom and gloom. It's, wow, life can be really joyful and meaningful and good, even if I'm anxious, even if I have anxiety. In fact, usually that's the price of admission for a meaningful life. But I can have it all, right? I can have the sweetness, the richness of a values-facing life, and I can make space and be really kind and compassionate to myself with all the storm of OCD and anxiety or whatever else I might be feeling that's really painful.
The other thing you talked about is like being in that present moment, that here and now. And I always tell people like the here and now is boring to OCD, right? So if I have a client sitting on my couch and they're so stressful and, they're talking about all these what ifs and this could happen. And I did this thing 7 years ago. What am I going to do? And sometimes I just slow it down in the session. I'm like, point to me the emergency right now. I will jump in. I will help you like point it out. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, we'll point the emergency. You're hyper breathing. You're agitated. Your speech is quick. You're telling me all these horrible things. And I'm like, where is the danger? I'm usually in my office, but early morning, it's easier to do it here. But if I was in my office, I would be like, point to the danger. And they're like, but there is no danger right now. And I'm like, But do you see your body language? Do you see your breathing? Do you see your talking? Like you're talking like something terrible is happening right now, yet you are in an air-conditioned office on a couch. The here and now is boring to OCD, the present moment. For me, one of the most powerful things was doing martial arts after my treatment and really learning like mindfulness and presence, but also had an undergrad teacher that really pushed that. And I think that's the other thing. And I also teach clients, feelings are temporary as well. This anxiety you're feeling, this angst you're feeling, this is a temporary emotion that will pass if you let it. So one thing I like about ACT and mindfulness and presence is OCD can only live in the future and the past. And if we allow ourselves to be here, typically it's boring for OCD and it'll leave you alone.
Yeah, it's so true. And one of the cool things too about ACT is such a mindfulness-based kind of treatment, right? So it is all about being able to use the kind of present moment processes. One cool thing about ACT is that like if we're caught up in compulsions, like mental compulsions, like rumination or over analysis or reassurance, or physical compulsions, or we're avoiding things, we never get to experience for ourselves that all emotions do pass. And it's very different, right? To kind of know that intellectually, like, oh yeah, I know, like there's a kind of the statement that emotions pass, everything's temporary. But if we don't allow ourselves to really experience it on like a somatic bodily level, it's not going to work. Our OCD is going to be like, that's for somebody else, not for me. But if we can slow down, like you were talking about, Chris, and really be with the feelings and ride the waves of them, and notice that just like a wave, they come up, they plateau, they go down, and it ebbs and it flows. And then you start getting more power back because you recognize, oh, this really doesn't pack the punch that our anxiety or OCD makes it seem like it does. So yeah, I think really pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, I'm here with my guest, Max. Remind me the last name, because I think I've been pronouncing it wrong this whole time.
McIngvale. Yeah.
You know why? Because of I call it I always call you Maisel because of the show.
Marvelous Miss Maisel. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a great show too. So if there's a show with the same last name, I'm glad that it was a high quality one. So
yeah. Wait, but is yours Maisel or is it
Maisel? Yes, that's exactly right.
I've been calling you Maisel because I was like, oh, the show. Okay, Maisel. If you're just joining us, I'm here with Max Maisel, who is a clinician here in the West Coast. If you haven't yet, we are going to get to questions in a second. If you pre-submitted a question, or if we didn't get to your question the last couple streams, they're on my list. We'll get to them, but we're also going to get to live questions. So if you just joined us, make sure to put a live question in the chat. I want to switch gears a little bit. Max and I are going to talk for a little bit more time, and we'll get to questions because we have a lot pre-submitted. But I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit. Can you talk to me a little bit about one thing that I always kind of bring up, stuff that comes up, whether it's the groups I run or with clients? And my mom and I run a free family and loved one support group, and we had 4 clients who had gotten better, and they were sharing their story. And one conversation that came up a lot was just like shame, disappointment, guilt. So these heavy emotions, distress, both from the people with OCD, just talking about feeling like they lost aspects of their life, or they felt bad for the strain financially and emotionally they caused on their family. And then there's a lot of family members who are saying, we just feel sad that we didn't catch it earlier and we didn't do more to help them. So in kind of the family unit, whether it's the client or the supporters, how do you kind of navigate those feelings of just dread and disappointment and sadness, and just like, hey man, what life could have been if maybe OCD hadn't hit so hard?
It's such a good question. It gives me the goosebumps even. And I mean, the ideas of like shame, grief, sadness, just that like the toll that OCD took, and sort of like almost like this fantasy of like, oh, how life could have been if I caught this earlier, or like the kind of more what if thoughts, like what if I did things different? And it comes up all the time. Clinical work, my consulting work, all of that. And again, so I really see everything through the lens of like ACT, as you're talking about acceptance, commitment therapy. And first and foremost, an ACT way to look at that is to totally like hold space for those feelings and to like acknowledge them and to honor them. Because like, if we look underneath the feelings of shame and grief and sadness, and if we look closely enough, we find values, right? We find things that are so important, so meaningful to people. And to me, like, the opposite end of the same coin, the opposite side of values is pain. And when we're not living the life that feels like authentic and congruent and meaningful, there's going to be pain there. And I mean, think about how empowering that is to recognize, like, what does this mean about what's important to me? Right? What's this telling me about my values and the life that I want? And again, from an ACT perspective, it's can we sort of like dig and mine for those values, but also recognize if I'm responding to the shame and to the grief in unhelpful ways, it's going to make things worse. And unhelpful ways might be ruminating about them, might be kind of getting stuck on them, trying to overanalyze them. So it's a very nuanced balance between acknowledging and honoring the pain to be able to like look underneath and find like, what do those mean about me? Like, what is this? What does this show that's like a really good, valuable thing, that I care about people, that I'm empathetic, that I have a vision for myself of the future that's really good and hopeful. And at the same time, if I'm not careful, when I kind of give into the anxiety, it becomes unhelpful rumination. It becomes unhelpful reassurance seeking. And that takes me even further away from my values, right? So if I can recognize like, what do these aspects mean about me? What do these feelings show me that's beautiful and good? And then how might I take that to make real concrete steps towards my life, to kind of like move in that direction, move towards more of like a value-based life versus sort of like spiraling and cycling, getting stuck in it. I'm where I was before. So I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's tough, and it just the conversation came up, and I hear it a lot from people of just, what could my life have been? Shame, sadness, frustration, sometimes feeling guilt, like what they put their family through. I think just reminding yourself that, it wasn't something you picked. You weren't bored, at one point in your life, and you're like, I'm going to bring this thing on and kind of take my family through it, take my loved ones through it, take my spouse through it, my kids through it, et cetera. And it's just, it isn't you. And I think, being, like you said, like, we can't just dismiss emotions. It would be great if we could. But I tell people sometimes it's like, be careful though, sometimes if you're bathing in that dirty bathwater for too long, because that's why I love Kimberly Quinlan's workbook and just her work about self-compassion, is that we know that like living in that place of like shame and guilt does not aid us in our recovery. In fact, according to a lot of the research that Kim shares in that book, it actually can stunt our growth as a person, but also in recovery. So really looking at like, what can I do, to kind of meet myself where I'm at, to hold space for myself, like you said, and just to have compassion. I mean, I always think the hardest thing about having OCD is everybody misunderstands it unless you treat it or have a loved one with it. But also having your brain attack you on almost like a consistent basis is extremely difficult to be in. Before we get into questions, I wanted to ask something. I have 18,604 conceptualizations for OCD, and it's mainly just based on client. But how, if you could describe to people how you sort of see OCD, like I'll give you an example. So, for a client that I'm working with who grew up in a home with a mom that probably had OCD as well, and everything was unsafe in the home, everything was unsafe at the house, be careful, be cautious, do this, do that. So their OCD has been hard to let go of because to them it feels like safety, for protection. This is how they were raised. I'm not saying how they were raised created the OCD, that not at all, but it's just helped, sort of helped kind of shape the way that the OCD is, because it's very similar to their mom's OCD and the way that their mom raised them and stuff. But to them, it feels like protection, safety. And as we've been working to sort of unravel the OCD, it almost feels like everything I'm doing is just, I'm no longer cautious. I'm being absolutely careless of a person, and it's causing them a lot of distress, not even specifically the things we're facing. And so we've really talked to the conceptualization of like, you have this condition that thinks everything is dangerous. It's scanning, it's constantly trying to protect you, yet nothing is really happening except in your mind, right? So for you, how do you conceptualize, OCD? It may be different, but for clients, or how can people watching think of what is going on with OCD? Because I think a lot of people are still confused, and we get a lot of new people that join us.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think very similar to your conceptualization, Chris. Like one way I like to think about it is sort of like an OCD, that flight or fight center of the brain, the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that's kind of like the radar that looks out for threats. And when we have OCD, it's like that amygdala flight or fight system, it's doing its job way too well. Right. It's like you're talking about, Chris, it's sort of like telling us that there's a danger, telling us there's a threat when really there's not, when really things are safe. And usually those threats that it picks up on have to do with thoughts, right? The thought of like, is something horrible going to happen? Am I going to get sick? What if A, B, and C, right? Replace it. And then your amygdala goes, oh, that's dangerous. That's not good. I need to do something to make it go away. I need to do something to feel better. And then we do the thing, we do the compulsion, or we wash our hands, or we reassure ourselves. And then our amygdala learns, oh yeah, that thing must have really been dangerous. Of course that was a threat, or else why wouldn't Max be like treating it like it's a threat? Because our amygdala doesn't learn by language, it learns by association. So when I treat the thought like it's dangerous, my brain's like, oh yeah, that must really be dangerous. And how I conceptualize treatment is to be able to step back and recognize like, oh, I'm going to have to learn like a different criteria with which to judge how threatening, how dangerous like thoughts are. And I'm gonna have to choose like, is this thought, am I going to treat that as a real threat? And if so, I'm going to do something about it. We're certainly not in the business of like taking real risks. Or am I going to choose to like label this thought as an OCD thought, which is going to be very different. And with an OCD thought, essentially what I want to do is retrain that amygdala, retrain my flight or fight response by not giving it anything it wants, which is essentially treating it as though it's irrelevant. The problem with that is it's not going to feel relevant. And that's why we do exposure therapy. Exposure therapy helps us sit with and be with the anxiety and be with the discomfort and be with your brain, just really throwing a temper tantrum. Take care of this thought, do something, protect yourself, do a compulsion. And if we can like really commit to treating it as though it's a false alarm, even though it doesn't feel like a false alarm, if we could take like a leap of faith, eventually we'll see that over time, that thought will loosen its grasp over you. And you'll feel more empowered. Your thoughts will take up less space. And that tends to lead to a very nice upward spiral, right? We feel more empowered. OCD loses its power. Those thoughts will certainly always be there, but they'll take less and less space, less time, less energy, and you'll be able to go and like live the life that you want to live without OCD constantly nagging at you.
Yeah, I'm going to jump into the first question, but it's funny because while you're talking, what always comes to mind when I hear about that conceptualization, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is there's a clip that went viral because the not the Kardashians, the Jenners, oh my God, Kylie and Kendall Jenner, they're like entering like a restaurant or something. And these little girl fans see them. And I mean, they don't understand bodyguards and celebrity. They just see these two icons to them. Yeah. And they go to run to hug them. And the security guards like lean down and like leap in front of them. And it's like two like 9-year-old girls. And it's like, that's what I think of OCD is. It's like these overzealous bodyguards that are taking these two little 9-year-olds as like threats and almost like knock them over. And in the video, because it's paparazzi everywhere, people are like, whoa. And, Kylie's like, hey, be careful, like the security guards, It's like, that's how I think of it, is like your threats are like this 8-9-year-old girl, but your bodyguards are like diving in and almost knocking people out. And it's just, there's a imbalance of what currently is and what if, right? What your mind is talking about. So
that's an amazing analogy. Yeah, I love that so much. I'm gonna steal that from you, Chris.
yeah, I'll have to remember to send you the clip, but it makes me so sad to these poor girls. I'm like, these bodyguards need to chill.
Yeah, seriously. Jeez.
I'm going to throw out the first question. I know we're not psychiatrists, so we'll answer this more from just what is our clinical experience with our clients. But Justin, at 12:06, your time, Emilio, is what are thoughts? What are your thoughts for ketamine treatment for severe BDD and OCD? So obviously, because we're not psychiatrists, I have a psychiatrist on every second Wednesday of the month. I'll make sure to ask them this question as well, Justin, but we can answer it just kind of what we see clinically.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Chris, or do you want me to take it first?
Yeah. I mean, what I have seen, I do have clients that have used ketamine. What I typically find is that the ketamine, what I'm hearing from them. So remember, Justin, I'm not a psychiatrist, but what I hear from both practitioners as well as my clients is that they feel that the ketamine really helps lift severe depression. And some of my clients that have done ketamine have really struggled with medications. They've taken a lot, they've tried the gamut and are just really not finding relief, what some people call treatment resistant depression. And what's made it very difficult to treat both their body dysmorphic disorder and OCD is that they don't even have the energy, they don't have the focus, they don't have the drive because of that depression. They find themselves staying in bed all day. They just don't even want to do anything to face their conditions that they're experiencing. What the ketamine has allowed them to do is really lift that depression. And once that depression has been lifted and they're on a consistent regimen, then they can go ahead and do the treatment for BDD and OCD. So I would say what I've heard, once again, as a clinician, is that they're saying that the ketamine hasn't really helped for thought specifically, like some people experience for medication, but it helps lift the mood, lift the depression. And now they're in a headspace to really do the treatment. So what I'd say for you, Justin, is if this is either for you or for a loved one or for a client, ketamine may not help with the thoughts specific. I know for a lot of people on medication, they'll say they almost hear the thoughts kind of fade a little bit, are less infrequent, easier to dismiss. But the ketamine more so has helped people have the energy, the mood, the depression lift so that they can do the treatment. But I've never heard anybody tell me, hey, ketamine has made my thoughts fade. That's kind of what I've heard clinically in my practice.
Yeah. And I've had similar, again, clinical experiences. Ketamine is very helpful for depression. This is like a whole new era right now, right? Like kind of the alternative ketamine, more kind of psychoactive type of treatments. I'm excited about it for the future. I think there's a lot of really good that will come from it. And talking with psychiatrists and doing research about it, the sense I get is we're not exactly sure the best ways to use ketamine for OCD and BDD specifically yet. I think the way of the future is looking at how do we incorporate exposure and response prevention within a ketamine treatment framework. Can we have people do exposures while they're actually on ketamine, 10 minutes after ketamine, a day after ketamine? I might be wrong here, but from my understanding of the research, we're just not there yet. This is all very new. And I think next 10, 20 years is going to be very exciting to figure out how exactly to use ketamine, because the effects, the dissociative effects of ketamine theoretically are supposed to help create some flexibility so people can start breaking some of those rigid patterns. And yeah, Chris, I don't see any reason why it would help with the thoughts, but I think it could help people do new things, try new behaviors, which might sort of affect how the neurons are firing in their mind in different ways. But I think it's pretty early on in that to be too definite about the effectiveness of it for OCD and BDD.
Yeah, Justin, I would definitely empower you to watch one of our, like I said, every second Wednesday is a stream with a psychiatrist. We've had some really good psychiatrists on this year. They talk a lot about this. And like you're saying, Max, things like TMS, rapid TMS, psilocybin, ketamine, MDMA, deep brain stimulation. There's all these things that are the next frontier. And obviously people that haven't had a good experience on medication for different reasons, that's very hopeful. So definitely check out some of our past live streams for sure. The next question is from X, from formerly known as Twitter at 1208. When I remember what I did during an episode, OCD episode, I feel ashamed and hate myself because of my behavior. How can I deal with this? Plus, why every time there's a theme end, there's a new theme that starts? It's switching every time. So kind of two-part questions. Like when somebody's in an OCD episode, they're doing compulsions, they're frantic. It seems like what happens is later upon reflection, they're ashamed of the behavior. And then second question, when one theme ends, a new theme starts. How do you deal with kind of like that whack-a-mole or that switching?
Yep. How do you want to do it, Chris? Do you want to take one part? I can take the other, or do you want to?
Yeah. Which part do you want to take?
I like the theme part. I can take that second part. I love that comment.
Yeah. What I'll tackle on the first part is one thing I really, really, truly believe is that if we can be more on the offense and proactive with our treatment, it can really help take care of that first part. So what I mean is often, let's say you're really triggered by religious symbols, right? Let's say you have scrupulosity and religious symbols really trigger you, and you're driving and you look over and you see a church, and all of a sudden your brain is like, oh my God, I just had a bad thought. I need to pull over and I need to start to pray, and you're frantic and you're late to something and you're agitated and you're not doing the compulsions right. And then you might be frustrated and say, I hate God. And then you're like, oh my God, why did I say that? Right. That's because in that moment, you are that scared dog being chased, right? You're frantic. You're like, oh my God. And so a lot of times what happens is we do and say and behave in ways. And, Allegra Castens and I have talked about this on streams before, our talks, is like a lot of times that can be some of where that sadness or trauma or whatever you want to call it comes from. As we look back at all the different compulsions. I have people with sexual orientation OCD that have watched certain pornography to see if they're into it or not, and then later on they're very disappointed. I watch pornography that's against my values. I watch same-sex pornography that's against my values. So what helps with that situation is being more proactive. So for instance, going back to my analogy with my example rather with scrupulosity, if I say, okay, today I'm going to go to, Subway, get a sandwich, and I'm going to park in the parking lot of a church and eat it while watching, allow thoughts to come and appear, let them sort of flow on by like leaves on a stream, and not do the compulsions, not have judgment, just exist while I'm eating my food. You may still be triggered, you may still do compulsions, but it's very different. You are more likely to not do frantic things because you're planned. Lastly, real quick before Max takes your second half, that can't always happen. Sometimes we do get triggered out there. Meet yourself with some compassion. You did those things because you were in the most prehistoric part of your brain in absolute desire to keep yourself safe and alive. And we do things, frantically in those moments, right? If we were at a theme park and one of the rides started falling over, we're going to run for the exit, right? We're not going to really think. So just have compassion, instead kind of plan for next time. And I always tell people, learning from an incident, planning and moving forward with a new plan is much better than beating yourself up for it. But I'm going to toss it for the second whack-a-mole part.
Yeah, for sure. And I just to piggyback off what you were saying, Chris, I think that self-compassion, first off, yes, like being able to address it before it happens, like every time if we can like nip it in the bud, that's the way to go. And inevitably we're all going to trip and stumble, right? That's part of OCD therapy. That's part of being human. And yeah, self-compassion is such a powerful, cool tool. I think you mentioned Kimberly Quinlan got an incredible OCD for a self-compassionate workbook. And oftentimes when we beat ourselves up or criticize, that could be a really sneaky compulsion too. Usually there's a sense of like, if I could beat myself up enough, then that'll prevent me from doing this again, right? Or there could be this sort of false sense of control. Oh, I need to hold myself accountable in this really harsh, critical way. And like that logic makes sense. But if you look at sort of like your experience and your history, usually not only does it not work, but it just makes it feel really crummy and potentially feeds OCD even more. So self-compassion, Kristen Neff is a huge researcher. She has a lot of amazing self-compassion work. I'll definitely Google her, Kimberly Quinlan. There's a lot of amazing resources out there. And then for the theme switching, yes, I mean, that is so common. We hear about like the whack-a-mole of OCD. It's like, oh yes, finally conquered this one theme. And I was able to get a sense of freedom and peace for like 2 seconds, and this other theme popped up. And that actually tells you something really important about your OCD that we can use for recovery, for treatment. And that is the content of your OCD, which is like the specific thoughts and stories, are trash. The content is nothing. OCD is going to try to trick you by pulling you into the content. Oh, now it's about getting cancer. Now it's about like, what if I hurt somebody? Or now it's about what if something horrible happens? But that's not what OCD is about at all. OCD tricks you with the content and it pulls you away from the really important part, which is the emotions, right? That sense of dread and uncertainty and discomfort. And if we recognize that OCD is never about the content, it's about the feelings in our body. And if we could ride the waves of those feelings without getting into the content, kind of just be with the discomfort without doing anything to make it go away, then eventually we'll see that no matter where OCD goes, it's all the same. It's always the same formula, right? It's an intrusive thought, could be anything, doesn't matter. It's really uncomfortable feelings, and it's an urge to make those feelings go away. And you could replace any sort of like content in that formula, and it's the same thing. And I'll often be encouraging for my clients, if you don't believe me, or even if you do, if you want to make it a little bit more experiential, next time you have an OCD spike or trigger, like see if you can like find it in your body. Like, where do I feel the anxiety? Where is that dread? And when OCD switches themes, bring that same curiosity. And it's very, very common for people to feel it in the exact same spot, right? It's all the same thing. It's the same sensations. And if we get sucked into like the stories, it's game over. OCD is already won. But if you can rise above the content, recognize like, oh, I know what this is. This is another thing that OCD is using to make me feel uncertain, then you will have the upper hand against your OCD.
Yeah, well said. There's a question at 12:10 from YouTube from Capisi that says, hello, what does schizo-obsessive mean? I'll be honest, I had to look it up because it's not a DSM diagnosis, but Robert Hudak wrote an article. I put it in the chat for you, Emilio. Maybe you can put that in the chat. So Capisi, what we're going to do is Emilio, who works for the IOCDF, is going to put up a recent article from 2018 on schizo-obsessive. And this is really somebody that it shows both schizophrenia and obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms. However, instead of having Max and I speak on it, I just realized who wrote the article is Robert Hudak, who's going to be on one of the streams upcoming. So please, please, please join us for that one when you see us promoting Robert Hudak if you want to know more about it. But we're going to put an article that really covers it. It talks about the combination. And the reason I think that Robert Hudak would be good is because I think for us, this is something that a lot of our clients get misdiagnosed with sometimes because they'll go to a hospital to get medicated and talk about the thoughts, and people will think of that if they don't know OCD as schizophrenia. So that's why I always say assessment is important. Max, I'm going to throw this pre-submitted question to you. It says, would you recommend looking for an additional therapist to work on other issues like depression and general life stuff? I feel comfortable with my current provider, but only terms of ERP and OCD. So I do hear this a lot where someone's like, look, my therapist is great with ERP. I'm getting better from OCD, but I have other stuff going on, maybe just general life stuff that I want to talk about. My OCD therapist, we're focusing on OCD, or maybe they're a little bit more like, like CBT, very like solution focused, and I want somebody a little bit more compassionate. So what are your thoughts about somebody seeing a therapist to work on general life stuff?
Yeah, I've no problem with that. I think it could be really helpful. And to me, it could actually really free up like the OCD work. Because then if you have all this other stuff you want to talk about, and it's hard to really like dive into the OCD work because it's like, well, I have like things that I want to process and vent and unpack. I want to work on my OCD as well, but how do I balance those? So if you have like the time, the resources, the ability to get both, then yeah, I say 100%. I'm all for that. I think like the biggest probably potential concern is how the other general therapist might like inadvertently be fueling OCD, like co-ruminating together, co-reassurance. So I would just want to make sure that the client is sort of aware how that might come into play, and to be far enough along in their OCD treatment, they'll be able to be like, oh, like this is unhelpful reassurance, probably not the best use of this other therapy. And I would certainly, as like an OCD therapist, I would certainly want to get and release information and collaborate with the other therapists, just so we're all on the same page. I think it's so important for our clients to feel like they have like a treatment team behind them, right? We're coordinating care. We have the specific goals highlighted, and people know what they're going to get with each therapist. So yeah, I think I'm all for that, but just want to be thoughtful about how we do it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that it's always important to have a collaborative team, make sure that they're communicating with each other. There is 2 questions that I put for the medication day. So remember, we always have a psychiatrist on the second Wednesday of the month. So there's a question about TMS. We'll definitely ask that question when we have a provider. We kind of address TMS. We're finding obviously there's a specific coil for OCD. Some people are finding it helpful, especially if medication didn't work. But to really go into the mechanism and all that, the psychiatrist would be better. We could kind of answer Carl's question. And then Carl, I'm also going to have the psychiatrist answer your question. But Carl talks about, this is at 12:11. What do you feel about medication only? So what are kind of just your clinical thoughts about people who maybe say, look, I don't want to do treatment. I don't feel like I want to do, anything psychology based, just medication.
Yeah. So I might be a little biased, right? Since I'm a clinical psychologist.
I was gonna say, that's why maybe a psychiatrist. Yeah, we might be biased.
But I think again, like I'm not a medical doctor, but I could speak for like the research, right? Because it's always, I think, important to be research informed. So what the research shows is that like behavioral therapy, CBT, ERP, ACT, and by the way, there's other evidence-based forms of OCD therapy than just like CBT. So I would say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but maybe looking at other sort of like behavioral interventions. But we know that these like behavioral, just put them under CBT umbrellas, whether it's ACT or ICBT or ERP. We know that those are very helpful standalone treatments. So oftentimes people get better just behaviorally without medications. We know that with especially more severe persistent chronic OCD, like the gold standard is a combination of medication and behavioral therapy. We know it's very helpful. We know that like medication itself for OCD or anxiety like can certainly be helpful. Although when people stop the medications, typically the symptoms come back because they're not learning the tools and the strategies. And I think for everybody, that's a conversation to be had with a psychiatrist, like the pros and the cons. But typically with people who have OCD, like the recommended approach is at least like a CBT oriented behavioral therapy with possibly an addition of medication. But of course, like there's different ways to do it. And like, there's no shame like trying the medication route itself. But like generally, especially if you're looking for like long-term health, it's not typically the first line recommended approach.
Yeah, agreed. Justin, yes, we did answer your question. So if you go back to, always remember this is up after the live stream, you can either go to youtube.com/IOCDF and click live, or if you go to, I think it's either live or videos on Facebook. And so Justin, we did answer your question. Courtney, you asked a question about medication working after pregnancy. I put that for our psychiatrist. So the second Wednesday, we just had it last week. So the second Wednesday of May, we'll be able to answer that just because I want to make sure the clinician answers that. For us though, Max, I'm on at 12:14 says, how can we draw a line between schizophrenia and OCD? I fear my brother is trying to harm me by controlling me by altering the mobile screen of mine. So I used to reset the phone like this case. Like, would that be it? So, because I think a lot of people, I know I got misdiagnosed so many times for different conditions because people just didn't know OCD. So when a client is coming in, doing an assessment, how do you, during that assessment process, determine like this is OCD, maybe with low insight, and then schizophrenia?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there's a couple factors. Again, I'm going to want to do a full comprehensive assessment to sort of like get a history of kind of course of potential OCD. OCD tends to operate in a specific way. For example, if somebody has like multiple OCD themes and like, oh, this is like another OCD theme that pops up, I'm a lot more likely to sort of like lean on like the OCD route versus schizophrenia. We know if just looking at base rates, like how many people are diagnosed with OCD versus schizophrenia, schizophrenia is like quite rare. OCD is a lot more common. So again, that kind of like, these are all factors I use in my mind when I'm working with, when I'm meeting with somebody. I take into account family history, right? So if somebody has like a strong family history of schizophrenia or psychotic disorders, again, like that's going to raise more of like the schizophrenia flag for me. And if they have a strong history of like OCD or anxiety, that's going to help me sort of like lean that way. Again, and like functionally, I'm looking at like what's going on there. What's that person's experience? And in this example, and again, this is just sort of speaking generally here. It sounds like my gut is saying there's like an uncertainty there, and they're doing something to like get some reassurance and appease the uncertainty. And that's pretty par for the course for OCD. With schizophrenia, one of the kind of big things, especially with people who have like, if they have like hallucinations, is the thoughts don't feel like they're coming from their mind. Usually it feels like it's coming from the outside. Like they'll hear like a phone ring, or they'll hear somebody say something that's not there. So that's like, if that happens, that's a little bit more of a clear distinction. But it can be pretty tricky sometimes. And oftentimes it really takes a deep dive into one's history and context to differentiate between the two.
Yeah, that's why you'll hear me say a couple of times is that's why assessment's so important. All of us, providers are going to do an assessment with you, Amon, to really kind of make sure, like, hey, what we're working with. I don't ever want to sit there and try to do OCD treatment with a client that doesn't have OCD, right? So assessment is really important, and really working with someone that understands these conditions, whether it's a psychological assessment, whether it's working with an OCD specialist. Kay at YouTube asked at 12:31. I always have the habit of writing down what I check. Does that exacerbate the compulsion? How should I deal with it? So what it sounds like is when they're doing checking compulsions, they'll write down what they check as like a second layer of like reassurance. Does that make the compulsion worse? And then how should I deal with it?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to take that one first, Chris, or do you want me
Yeah,
to?
I can take that first. I mean, I'll take the first part. Maybe you could talk about how to deal with it. I'll tell the first part. Unfortunately, Kay, yes, it does make it worse. And I know that because I used to do that. Or now with modern technology, what you can do is you can check the stove and then take pictures of it, right? The hard thing is I'm really big on inhibitory learning and what are we learning and what are we teaching ourselves. And in that moment, all you're teaching yourself is that you cannot trust yourself. You cannot trust your senses. You can't trust you as a person because you're having two layers of compulsions. You're doing the initial check and then you're writing down what you checked. And so all I'm hearing in that moment is your brain is saying, I don't know if I checked it or not. I don't know if I could trust my memory or trust me as a person. And so I think what's so important is to say, okay, this isn't sending the right message. It's making me feel like I'm not I'm a incompetent person. I can't trust what I remember, etc. And what we're really trying to do in OCD treatment is get you back to trusting yourself, getting you back to kind of trusting your environment, feeling confident, and recognizing that there isn't currently an issue in front of you. And so what I would say is like, yes, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. It's probably making it worse. But I will say Max is going to talk about how dealing with it. But always remember, it doesn't have to be black or white. You don't have to leave the stream today and cut out everything. But Max, how can someone deal with this?
Yeah, 100% everything you said, Chris. So, okay, I feel you, and your brain's going to do everything it can to get that sweet reassurance from intrusive thoughts, right? That's kind of par for the course. So I think approaching this with a whole lot of self-compassion and kindness for yourself, and recognize like, wow, my OCD is sneaky, right? It's like you can see how it's like finding ways to grow and to water and to nourish itself. And the cool thing is we can break it down for you. And I'd say like going into it with the goal of making space. Might sound kind of wild saying this, so like making space for the uncertainty, even like inviting uncertainty and anxiety. And the reason for that is your OCD needs you to resist and needs you to fight. And if you can actively seek, almost like you're a heat-seeking missile, but for uncertainty, right? If you can move towards it, I promise you, your OCD is going to have no ground to stand on. It just won't. So, but like Chris is saying, you don't have to dive into the pool head first. I would encourage you to find ways to break it down. Like you can make it easy on yourself. It doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10 anxiety challenge. For example, I might think like, what's like the smallest little tiny baby step you could take that would help you maybe experience like a little bit of uncertainty without ripping off the Band-Aid too much. For example, if you currently write down what you check, at the end of the day, right, maybe like a couple weeks, couple months from now, we want to get to the place where you don't have to check at all. But for now, maybe changing the way that you write it down. For example, if you write like a couple sentences in detail, maybe writing like a word or a phrase, right? Or maybe waiting 10 minutes before you write it down. It doesn't really matter. Essentially, anything that you do that's like purposely creating space for your uncertainty and anxiety on purpose is going to be helpful. And then you can sort of slowly but surely build on that as you learn to trust yourself, like Chris was saying, and as you accrue wins under your belt, you'll feel more empowered and your anxiety, your OCD will start shrinking.
Yeah, I like that because I think sometimes people think treatment has to be black or white, where it's like, well, I have to give up everything and I don't want to do treatment. It's like, no, it can be done in a systematic way. Nikki said she likes my analogy, so thank you, Nikki. That means a lot. I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to try to get one or two more questions, and then I definitely want to give you the stage to give everybody a final thought. But Betsy says at 12:39, over the years, I have used compulsions to prevent thoughts. So obviously compulsions to try to prevent and stop thoughts. So if I accept the compulsion as an OCD brain association, so the amygdala, and continue to follow my values and sitting with the feeling. So I think they're asking a little bit about ACT. So right now they're using compulsions to prevent thoughts.
Yeah.
But now, okay, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, we generally don't want to accept compulsions. So in ACT, what we want to do, and Chris, let me know if I'm not quite answering the question correctly. The acceptance piece of ACT, it's more of like
what she's saying is if she accepts that the compulsions are a brain, because you talked about like the amygdala, the brain associating certain things with dangerous. So if you accept like, hey, this is OCD, and then instead follow your values and sit with those feelings, the thoughts. So I think because it was what you were saying earlier. What I'm reading as a question, Betsy, you could correct me, is right now what they're doing is using compulsions to prevent thoughts, but what they heard you saying is like, hey, these compulsions, but I think they probably mean like obsessions and fears, right? So if you accept like those obsessions, those fears are more
I
of an
see.
OCD thing, but
Yes.
continue to follow your value field. Yeah, I got tripped up on compulsions. I think what you mean, Betsy, is if you accept those obsessions and therefore the compulsions that you're doing because of those obsessions as OCD, not you.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And maybe Betsy, it's like the urges to do compulsions, because the compulsion itself obviously is like that's gonna make the OCD worse, but we might feel urges to wash or to seek reassurance or to like overanalyze. Yes. So it's a really good question. And yeah, I appreciate the nuance in it as well. And essentially the answer is yes. If we can recognize like, oh yeah, like wow, look at this is like my OCD. This isn't a threat that I need to listen to. Cool. But we want to be careful. And again, it could be really nuanced, right? We don't want to give ourselves false reassurance. We don't be like, no, there's no way this is OC. This is just my brain association. And the reason why that is problematic is because your OC is going to pop up somewhere else, because we're not dealing with the core problem, which is you being okay not knowing, right? So yes, certainly to be able to ground yourself and recognize like, oh, wow, this is an intrusive thought. That's a fact. But that doesn't also necessarily mean that that thing won't happen. And that piece where you go, oh, like the uncertainty, that's what we want to capture. If we can sit with the discomfort and uncertainty without making it go away, eventually it'll become smaller and less powerful. And over time, you will believe that you're safe just naturally. But in the moment, if you try to convince yourself desperately, it won't work. So yeah, using the idea that this is a brain association to help you practice these skills, totally good step, but we don't want to use it as reassurance.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. Last question, because I'm looking at the time. Bex, you asked two amazing questions. So I'm going to take one of the questions that you asked first, and then the second one I put on our pre-submitted list and didn't get to list because both of them are great. We just don't have the time. But let's use the one at 1241. Bex says, I know that my intrusive thoughts are ego dystonic, meaning it's not, comprehensive with who I am as a person. But I am convinced that if I was a good person, my brain wouldn't come up with that stuff to begin with. Is there a possibility they will ever go away? I can kind of take it up first, and then you can follow up. I would say, Bex, one thing that we always want to remind people is that even people without OCD get thoughts that are unpleasant and disturbing. And I've had friends tell me like, oh, there's this kid crying on a plane. I wanted to throw it out the window, right? And I'm like, oh, I've had that too. But so we're going to come up with thoughts, right? And that's why one of the components that we keep trying to push in this community is to not own every single content of our thought. Max was talking about that earlier. So, there's a level of judgment that I'm hearing about yourself and about the content of your thoughts and what kind of person you are for having thoughts. But I'd say, Bex, typically that's why people get OCD treatment in the beginning, is because who they are at their core is they are a good person. And when they have those thoughts that come up and are disturbing, it causes such distress that they want them to go away, which proves that they're a good person, right? But to answer the second question, this is how I think about it. And I'll use more of a lived experience perspective. When I reflect back on all my OCD, I had harm thoughts about family members, intrusive sexual thoughts and stuff. Those don't come up for me anymore. And I truly believe, because I've gotten to a point where I realized that was never Chris in the first place. And so therefore there isn't really anything there. It was kind of just like OCD on a smear campaign against me, but I didn't bite, and it's not who I am. And through treatment, I just don't have it come up. I am somebody that likes to do good work. I'm a perfectionist. I will stay up late to do things. OCD SoCal, we're having an event in Orange County on May 3rd, and I was up with one of the board members, my mom, until like 1 a.m. last night to get things going, because we want to really have a good turnout. That is a little bit of my perfectionism, OCD, wanting to do things, wanting to be perfect. But if I even took OCD away, I'd still want to do good work. And I think that's why that's something I have to still navigate. But thoughts that are just totally against me as a person have faded, because I've learned, I've resolved it. I know that those aren't me. So years ago, when OCD would try to still chirp, like, maybe you want to hurt people, I'm like, dude, I'm not even going to engage anymore, because that's so not me as a person.
Yeah. Wow. It's so good. I know we're about at time, but just to piggyback off that real fast, like the, and Bex, I could just like the question exudes just like so much good kindness and empathy and compassion. And like, this is one reason why I love working with OCD, because I'm biased, but I think people with OCD are like the best sort of people in so many ways. And yeah, like what Chris is saying, it's a paradox. It's a paradox. And the paradox is that, yeah, there's a good likelihood that those thoughts will lose a whole lot of power and like may not even show up anymore. But if you want them to go away, if you don't want to experience them, if you're afraid of them, then they're not going to go away. So and this is like what you'll do in therapy, right? This is part of it. But if I can get to the place where I totally am okay with those thoughts being there or not being there, I like could give an F. It's like, okay, then your brain will get bored and probably you'll have less of them. But if you really don't want to have them, it's like, oh no, these thoughts mean I'm so bad. I can't have these thoughts. I need to push them out. Then you're going to have a whole lot of them. So the answer is like yes and no, right? Yes, there's possibility, but you have to first be okay. And part of that is like in therapy, looking at some of the underlying beliefs you have about, well, I believe that these thoughts mean I'm a bad person, and kind of deconstruct that a little bit. And that's not getting into the content of the thoughts, but that's getting into your beliefs, which actually can be a really helpful part of treatment. Can we deconstruct that and kind of like recognize, oh, like why are these beliefs here? Might there be a different way to like read the situation that'll really help me get to the place where I can let go of controlling my thoughts?
I want to use an analogy real quick as my final thought, and then I'm going to give you final thought. But an analogy I give with what Max just said is one thing that really helped me is becoming indifferent. I think that was the final like 1-2 punch to OCD. So what I mean by that is, like Max was saying, if I wanted those harm and sexual intrusive thoughts to go away, they would have kept coming back. There was that tug of war. And a lot of times I'll hear clients say, okay, so should I just ignore those thoughts? And I'm like, no, ignoring is a lot of work. If I'm at a grocery store and I see somebody I don't like and I'm ignoring them, I have to know what aisle they're walking down so that I don't walk down that same aisle. And then when I go to check out, I have to look to see, are they checking out at the same time? Which register can I go to that they can't see me? And then when I go to leave the grocery store, I have to see if their car's still there and wait for them to go. So ignoring takes so much energy. Indifference is basically saying, I'm going to go grocery shopping. If they come across me, I'll say hi to be polite. If I don't see them, I don't see them. I don't care. I'm here to buy groceries and leave. So when I got to a point where I really kind of resolved OCD and I was like, you know what? I'm indifferent to you about the harm and sexual thoughts. If you want to come up 80 times a day, great. 8 times, great. -8, great. I just don't care. That's when OCD really lost its power. And by the way, Betsy said you answered the question great. So thank you. I just want to say that. But Max, what would you like your final, kind of just like a final thought to give everybody that was watching today, just to kind of help them get through the rest of the day?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I just want to say, like the space is so cool, and all these questions are just like incredible, and there's so much hope out there. Just the fact that everyone's like asking these questions and thinking about OCD in a way where we're sort of like kind of separating from the content, but I guess kind of going from the ACT viewpoint of like how human it is to respond to pain, whether it's an intrusive thought or anxiety or discomfort, with like trying to fight it or push away, but also to be able to recognize that. There are other ways, right? If we can take a step back and notice in that moment that there's a painful experience, like an intrusive thought or a feeling, making notice our urge to push it away, but there might be different approaches that are going to be more helpful in the long term, which would be some of the things that we've talked about: self-compassion, willingness to experience our thoughts and our feelings, connecting with your values, and recognizing if I like let go of needing to fight or push away, then I'm freed up to like engaging in what is happening right here, right now in front of me, and like the sweetness that might offer you, perhaps.
Well said, Max. Thank you so much for everybody joining us. Nachan, OCD Surviving, Bex, and a few others. I saw your questions. There's just only so much time, but I went ahead and put all of those on this list, and we will get to those in future streams. So make sure to come back. We're here every Wednesday. The first Wednesday, I'm with my partner in crime, Liz McIngvale. Second Wednesday, we always have a psychiatrist. Third, we take people from our special interest groups, our affiliates, and our global partners. And then the fourth and sometimes fifth Wednesday, we have special guests like Max, which is really cool to have on. So make sure you're here every Wednesday. I'll get to those questions we didn't get to today. Max, a big shout out. Thank you so much for coming in clutch, for coming on. It was so great. What I love about having all these different experts on the live stream is that there's always different perspectives. And I think you gave a lot of like unique perspectives from other guests. And you used a lot of really good evidence-based information today that I think will help people see things different. So I appreciate you, brother, for coming on, for being here. Final thought, make sure you go to IOCDF.org rather for everything OCD. And don't forget that our conference, the second weekend in July, is coming up in Chicago rapidly. You can register today. So go to IOCDF.org/conferences and IOCF.org/live streams for more information about this. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. And remember, OCD is a liar. Kick its butt. Take care.